When the police arrived, the house should have been a crime scene frozen in time, evidence scattered, clues waiting to be uncovered, a story written in blood, fingerprints, and footprints. But it wasn't. The room was spotless, every surface wiped clean, every object seemingly untouched, and not a single trace of struggle remained. The forensic team later described it as one of the most baffling scenes they had ever encountered. How could a crime occur and yet leave no evidence at all? This is the story of this crime scene was cleaned before investigators arrived. A case that challenges everything we know about crime, investigation, and the thin line between order and chaos. It began as a seemingly ordinary emergency call. Neighbors reported a disturbance, a scream, something that hinted at violence. When officers reached the location, the exterior of the house seemed normal, quiet, unassuming, and deceptive in its calm. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing that suggested that anyone had tampered with the scene. Inside, however, the situation was far stranger. The very air seemed deliberate, sterile, almost rehearsed. Every item appeared exactly where it should be, every surface scrubbed to a near-polished sheen, as if someone had anticipated the arrival of the authorities. Detectives were immediately unsettled. Crime scenes are chaotic by nature, a reflection of the violence that occurred within them. Blood spatter, overturned furniture, and misplaced objects all tell a story. But here, the story had been erased. It wasn't just that evidence was missing. The crime scene itself seemed to have been manipulated, orchestrated in advance, leaving investigators with questions that had no easy answers. Witnesses were scarce. A few neighbors claimed to have heard arguing earlier in the day, a sound that suggested tension and possible danger. But when police questioned them further, their recollections were vague, fragmented, and inconsistent. Nothing concrete could be confirmed. Security footage from nearby cameras offered little help. The angle of the shots, the time of day, and the positioning of vehicles left more questions than answers. Every lead seemed to evaporate before it could take shape. Forensic specialists, when brought in, were stunned. They scoured the house for traces, fingerprints, hair, fibers, even microscopic residues, but found almost nothing. Where normally there would be a trail, there was an emptiness that was almost unnatural. It was as if the house itself had been staged to hide a violent truth, a carefully executed cover-up designed to mislead even the most experienced investigators. The detectives began to suspect that whoever committed the crime had extraordinary knowledge of investigative procedures. Someone had anticipated the arrival of authorities and systematically removed anything that could tie them to the scene. But why? And how had they accomplished such a thorough cleanup in so little time? The timing suggested precision, almost military-like efficiency, and a level of preparation that was rare even among professional criminals. As the team dug deeper, they discovered subtle hints that something was deliberately left behind. A faint smear on a doorknob, a single hair out of place, a footprint partially visible under a rug, tiny details that most people would overlook, but to trained eyes, screamed intentionality. These fragments became the breadcrumbs that investigators would follow, clues pointing to a meticulous and calculating mind behind a crime that had been scrubbed clean. Before anyone could witness it, theories began to emerge. Had the crime been premeditated to the point of perfection? Was this a warning, a statement, or something more sinister? Friends and family of the victim were stunned when they learned the scene had been altered. Before investigators could examine it, their disbelief was palpable. How could someone commit a crime and erase every trace of it, leaving no evidence for the very people sworn to uncover the truth? Even the timing of the call to authorities was suspect. Reports suggested that a neighbor's tip came hours after the incident, a window during which the scene could have been manipulated. Investigators realized that by the time they arrived, crucial moments in the timeline had already been erased. The crime scene had become a puzzle missing its most essential pieces, forcing detectives to reconstruct the events without the primary evidence. That usually tells the story. As the investigation continued, the detectives realized that what they were facing was unlike any ordinary crime. This wasn't a scene left by panic or a spontaneous act of violence. It had been curated, controlled, and sanitized. Every detail, from the placement of furniture to the absence of blood, suggested someone had meticulously anticipated the investigators' every move. The question was no longer just who did it, but how could anyone erase an entire crime scene with such precision? Forensic teams returned repeatedly, examining the smallest traces, hoping to find even the tiniest hint. And they did. A faint smudge on the kitchen counter, a small streak of dirt along the hallway, almost imperceptible, was enough to ignite a new wave of scrutiny. Each minor clue suggested a fleeting presence, something overlooked by even the most thorough cleanup. But despite these fragments, the bigger picture remained terrifyingly elusive. The house had been scrubbed to perfection, leaving no clear path to the truth. Detectives began to suspect that the perpetrator might have had prior experience with law enforcement procedures. It was the only explanation that fit the meticulous nature of the cleanup. They questioned neighbors again, this time focusing on patterns, habits, and unusual activity that had previously gone unnoticed. Several people recalled seeing a car parked nearby at odd hours, or someone moving items in and out of the house quietly. These small memories, almost too trivial to mention, began to coalesce into a timeline, one that hinted at premeditation on a level the investigators had never encountered before. Interviews with friends and family added another layer of mystery. The victim had been ordinary by most standards, someone without known enemies, someone trusted and respected in their community. And yet, the sophistication of the cleanup suggested that the crime wasn't random. Someone had targeted this person specifically, with a precision that implied deep knowledge of their routines, habits, and vulnerabilities. The idea that this was an impulsive act of violence began to seem impossible. As detectives pieced together the new timeline, they discovered that the crime had likely occurred hours before the call to authorities. The gap in time was crucial. It allowed the perpetrator to remove or manipulate every physical clue before anyone could witness the aftermath. Even security cameras that might have captured activity were either cleverly avoided or tampered with. Every step pointed to the same conclusion. The crime scene had been deliberately cleaned, not as an afterthought, but as a calculated measure to obscure the truth. The psychological implications of this realization weighed heavily on the team. A clean crime scene isn't just an obstacle, it's a message. It tells investigators that someone is always one step ahead, that every effort to uncover the truth can be anticipated and countered. It challenges the very foundation of criminal investigation, turning what should be a systematic search for evidence into a puzzle, where the pieces have been removed before the game even begins. Detectives began to explore unconventional leads, interviewing unusual sources and revisiting areas that had seemed irrelevant. One tip led them to an abandoned storage unit that contained items missing from the victim's home. Another led to a private contractor who had recently been in the neighborhood and had oddly detailed knowledge of home security systems. Each discovery seemed disconnected, yet collectively, they pointed to a meticulous, almost obsessive mind behind the crime. Family members watched with a mix of horror and disbelief as the investigation reopened in earnest. The realization that the scene had been cleaned so thoroughly struck them profoundly. They were forced to confront the unnerving reality that someone had prepared for this moment. Long before the authorities arrived, the victim's final hours were obscured not by chaos, but by deliberate, chilling control. Every erased fingerprint, every polished surface, every removed item was a calculated act, a decision made to keep the truth hidden. Even after months of painstaking work, the detectives could not fully reconstruct the events. The crime scene, once a silent witness, had been stripped of its voice. The evidence that remained was incomplete, cryptic, and challenging, forcing investigators to rely on intuition, experience, and every tiny trace left behind. And yet, it was precisely these fragments, the overlooked smear, the misaligned object, the faint footprint that became the key to understanding the criminal's mind. This crime scene was clean before investigators arrived. As a reminder that not all crimes leave the chaos we expect. Sometimes, the absence of evidence is itself the most telling clue. It challenges assumptions, tests patience, and forces both investigators and viewers to consider the unseen, the deliberate, and the unnervingly precise. The case defies simple explanation and leaves a haunting truth, even in the absence of visible clues. The story of what happened can be traced through the shadows, the small details, and the deliberate omissions that speak louder than any visible evidence. In the end, the house remained a monument to the criminal's meticulousness, a place where every corner and surface had been scrubbed clean, yet where the faintest hints persisted, taunting investigators and viewers alike. The mystery endures because, in cases like this, perfection itself becomes a weapon. And what is missing tells a story that nothing else could. Every viewer is left to wonder, how do you solve a crime when someone has erased it before you? Even arrive?